This news is funded by viewers like you. Please support our work at democracynow.org/give. We begin today's show with what we know about the two apparent attacks that unfolded in the U.S. on New Year's Day and the response so far. The FBI has identified the driver of the Tesla Cybertruck that exploded outside the Trump International Hotel in Las Vegas Wednesday morning as 37-year-old Matthew Livelsberger of Colorado Springs. He died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head moments before his rented car, packed with fireworks and fuel canisters, burst into flames, injuring 7. Livelsberger was an active-duty member of the Army. He was a Green Beret and Special Forces Master Sergeant. From 2017 to 2019, he served 3 tours of duty in Afghanistan. Before that, he deployed to the Republic of Congo, Ukraine, and Tajikistan. Livelsberger was on leave from his base in Germany. FBI Special Agent Spencer Evans said Thursday investigators are still searching for a motive.
We know we have a bombing, absolutely, and it's a bombing that certainly has factors that raise concern. It's not lost on us that it's in front of, of the Trump building, that it's a Tesla vehicle, but we don't have information at this point that definitively tells us or suggests it was because of this particular ideology or any of the reasoning behind it.
The FBI says it has not found a link between the Las Vegas man and the suspect in the New Orleans attack earlier, just a few hours earlier on New Year's Day. Both men served in the U.S. Army, including overlapping assignments at Fort Bragg in North Carolina, what it used to be called. But there's no evidence they knew each other. President Biden Wednesday said the FBI had named 42-year-old Texas-born U.S. citizen, U.S. Army veteran Shamsuddin Jabbar as the suspect who rammed his pickup truck into throngs of revelers on Bourbon Street early Wednesday, killing 14.
I've directed them to keep looking. The individual who rented the truck that exploded in Las Vegas also served as active duty U.S. Army. And the FBI is working with the Department of Defense on investigating, including the service members' possible motives and all those he worked with.
Jabbar had posted 5 videos to social media in the last few hours before the attack, pledging allegiance to ISIS and discussing plans to kill his family. Both Jabbar and Livelsberger were divorced. CNN reports Jabbar's second wife had a restraining order against him during their divorce case. Meanwhile, in recent months, Livelsberger had reportedly removed pictures of himself from Facebook in which he proposed to his partner and cradled his newborn baby in his arms. On Thursday, President-elect Donald Trump blamed what he called Biden's open borders policy for, quote, radical Islamic terrorism, in apparent reference to the New Orleans attack. President Trump said once again that people coming from outside of the country were more dangerous than people at home. Soon after, President Biden said that the Texas man was a U.S.-born Army veteran. Meanwhile, Trump's incoming senior director for counterterrorism, Sebastian Gorka, also responded to the New Orleans attack. Gorka advised Trump in his first term, but was pushed out after The Forward revealed he once had ties to a Hungarian far-right Nazi-allied group and that he supported an anti-Semitic racist paramilitary militia in Hungary while he served as a Hungarian politician. Gorka spoke on the right-wing news outlet NEWSMAX.
You need to understand, every single one of our NEWSMAX viewers, you are on the front line of the war against global jihadism. It's not just our tier 1 operators. It's not just the guys at Dam Neck, the SEALs, or the guys over the wire at Bragg. You, like the people on Bourbon Street, are on the front line. So be aware, keep your head on a swivel. And if you hear people doing strange things, acting peculiarly, apparently this individual converted to Islam last year, you need to also share that information.
For more, we're joined by Mike Preisner, an Iraq War Army veteran who's been watching these developments closely. He previously co-founded March Forward, an anti-war group of veterans and active service members, and worked with Veterans for Peace and another group called About Face. He still works as a GI organizer. Michael Preisner joined the U.S. Army in 2001 when he was 17 and left the military in 2005. His company participated in the 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq, where he served for a year. He hosts a podcast for service members called Eyes Left. In June, his report for the Empire Files was headlined "Dozens Quitting U.S. Military Over Gaza in Protest, Voices of Hidden Unrest Within the Ranks." Mike Preisner, welcome to Democracy Now! Thank you for joining us from Portland, Oregon. If you can start off by responding to these two attacks. Now, again, the authorities say they see no connection between the two. They think both men acted alone. They did use the same app to rent their cars. Leibelsberger rented in Denver an EV, one of those Tesla cyber trucks, which looks like a tank. And you have Jabbar, who launched this attack in New Orleans, used his car as a weapon, his EV pickup truck. But both men were in the military. You have Leibelsberger, a Green Beret, and you have Jabbar, who was in the military for more than a decade, now a military veteran. Talk about what took place on New Year's, Mike.
Right. Well, both of these incidents and individuals seem quite different, other than the fact that both of them seem to be triggered by relationship issues. But the main thing that links them is the fact that military service is now the #1 predictor of becoming what is called a mass casualty offender, surpassing even mental health issues as a profiler. You know, there are many different consequences of having a massive military empire, the biggest humanity has ever seen, both in its sheer size, its expanse around the world, one that is constantly engaged in endless and morally indefensible wars around the world. And one of those consequences is the violence abroad coming back against people at home. Leibelsberger, of course, his career was one of killing. And then, you know, the New Orleans attacker says he was inspired by ISIS. The mass killing ideology of ISIS. ISIS would not exist were it not for the U.S. military's complete destruction of Iraq and mass killing of innocent people. You know, America in general, of course, has a mass violence problem. Mass shootings happen quite regularly, more than once a day on average. And that the reasons for that are linked to U.S. militarism, both in the kind of cultural domination of a country that glorifies violence and exports violence, but more so a government that is presiding over a country with deep and extreme social problems, which it refuses to address while having a blank and endless check for militarism abroad and an ever-increasing budget for the military-industrial complex. And so this gives rise to an extreme amount of social problems in our society that are rooted in things like alienation and inequality and desperation and despair and hopelessness. And then so the U.S. military comes in and for the purposes of recruitment must target people who are most impacted by those social problems. They bring them into an institution where they train them to kill. They train them that killing is actually quite honorable and quite cool. It sends many of those people to kill abroad. You know, it has a notoriously, very notorious for ruining people's mental health and a mental health system that makes people's mental health problems even worse, and then spits them back out into a society where people find their lives harder than when they join. That's kind of why I think that has become a #1 predictor of becoming a mass casualty offender, is all of those consequences. And you know, we look at Fort Bragg in particular. You mentioned both these people passed through Fort Bragg. You know, Fort Bragg was for 2 decades the hub of the global war on terror, in particular the special operations factor, which does some pretty dark stuff around the world. And so it's really no surprise that 2 of these people passed through this base and that they are just joining a larger number of people from the military who end up carrying out acts of violence on others. A lot of these are turned inward, and there's, of course, an epidemic of suicide and drug addiction and alcohol addiction and overdoses and things like that. But of course, when you have a scenario like that in our society, some number of those people will instead of self-destruction, will move to the destruction of others, which is what we've seen with these two individuals.
And again, Fort Bragg is now called Fort Liberty because Bragg was an enslaving Confederate general, Braxton Bragg, a Confederate officer in the U.S. Civil War, and like a number of bases, it has been renamed. You talk about the violence, also an epidemic of violence against women on these bases. And it's always interesting in these mass casualty events, whether you're talking about a mass shooter in a school like Sandy Hook, to look at the attacker's relationship with women in the past. I mean, you had the Sandy Hook shooter killed his mother before, but often when domestic violence isn't taken seriously, you see the escalation of the violence, Mike.
Absolutely. I mean, and this is a problem that's endemic to the military as well. I mean, Fort Liberty, it's high rates of domestic violence, of murders even. Seth Harp, who's another anti-war Iraq War veteran, has also done really important work on this. And so, yes, I mean, there is, of course, many indicators. I mean, it comes back to this idea that we have this mass violence problem. There are many ways that the government could be stopping this, could be taking measures to get to the root of these things, but instead it just exacerbates them. And of course, the U.S. military is, there's so many cocktails in our society that allow these things to bubble over into violence against other people. The military is just, one of the stronger cocktails that exists.
And let's talk about Livelsberger, what we understand now happened. He's the Green Beret who drove that Cybertruck that blew up in front of the Trump Hotel in Las Vegas. Apparently, he died of a self-inflicted bullet wound. Can you talk about soldier suicides?
Well, I mean, it's an epidemic, and it has been for a long time. I mean, it's something that, especially was exacerbated when the Iraq and Afghanistan wars began. You have people like Livelsberger who, deployed many, many, many times in special operations. He no doubt was involved in things that involved in killing all over the world. But the way that the military historically, and from my own experience, being in touch with so many service members who were struggling against this, the military's policy when it comes to mental health and suicide and things like that is to maintain the fighting force. And so the goal of the U.S. military when they're dealing with this epidemic within their ranks is to keep the fighting force active and keeping people deploying and things like that. And that's what we saw throughout the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so, of course, there's a great deal of this, in society writ large. But in the military in particular, some Livelsberger who injured many people and could have killed some people as well. And so, on face value, it looks like, he was just another statistic of someone from special operations or the military in general that killed themselves, but, was doing it in this kind of spectacular way. Went out with a bang, which, with our corporate media that sensationalizes so many of these incidents, maybe was inspired to do something that, made a scene or something like that. But I think the suicide is, of course, a major problem in the military and in our society for the reasons that I mentioned earlier. And that, there's going to be some layer of those people that, want to turn that violence on other people as well as themselves.
An article in the Washington Post from about, a month ago is headlined, "Trump could hobble renewed fight against domestic terrorism, analysts warned." Now, this is really interesting. I remember when Obama came to office and there was a report on domestic terrorism, especially right-wing terrorism in the military. He was pressured not to have that report released. This is an ongoing issue. Then you have the misinformation that Fox put out on New Year's Day saying that the truck that was rented came over. This is the truck in New Orleans that Jabbar used, came over the border in the last 2 days. It was not minutes later that Trump didn't post on Truth Social that finally people have to accept that people who come from outside this country are more of a threat than people who are born here. And he attributed the minimizing of foreign threat to Democrats and the fake news media. Of course, he was wrong about this, and Jabbar was a U.S.-born, U.S. citizen, served in the military for more than 10 years. Mike.
Of course. Well, the Trump administration is going to use the New Orleans attacker to, feed into their right-wing agenda. The reality is that when we look at extremist attacks or violence from people who have been in the military or are still in the military, a very, very tiny number of those people you could say were inspired by Islamic extremism. But right-wing extremism is, in fact, a very prevalent and common thing, and has been throughout the entire history of the U.S. military. I mean, the Ku Klux Klan, the America's premier domestic terrorist organization, was one founded by military veterans. And throughout the entire history of the U.S. military, white supremacists and right-wing organizations have heavily recruited from and been led by people who are in the military and military veterans as well. This all came to a head in the 90s, the Oklahoma City bombing, but also you had neo-Nazi service members in the Marines commit a lynching of a black couple in Fayetteville, North Carolina. And then so there was this brief period of crackdown of the military on right-wing extremism, but when the Iraq War started going very badly and they needed bodies to continue to go to the Iraq War, they completely removed the restrictions on this kind of thing. And then, which has been exposed by many journalists, were knowingly bringing in right-wing extremists, some of whom were going into the military specifically to get training to bring back out into their organizations. And so today we have many far-right organizations like Adam Waffen Division, Identity Europa, Patriot Front, some of those organizations founded by veterans, but also who recruit heavily from the military and veterans as well. Like leaked documents from Patriot Front show that more than 20% of their applicants are young veterans or people who are still in the military. This is a real danger. The Oath Keepers. After January 6th, it was revealed that so many of the participants were military veterans. In fact, many from the special operations were really the tactical leadership of that assault, and many of whom had stashed large numbers of assault rifles and ammunition in hotel rooms that were very near the Capitol assault. And so, of course, this is something that should concern everyone. It's obviously, the real clear and present danger when we're talking about extremism from within the military. But the Trump administration has indicated that the problem in the military is, in fact, wokeism. And they may be going after woke generals or things like that, which really means they will be going after trans people. But also I think it's very concerning when we talk about what we should look forward to with the Trump administration, how they're going to combat extremism from the military. One of Trump's main program platforms on his 20-point program for his presidency, one of them was deporting pro-Hamas terrorists. And so, of course, we know that the Trump administration, when they say pro-Hamas, they really just mean pro-Palestine. This, I guess, brings me to the point that the military, as we've been discussing, really transforms people. In a lot of ways, it can tend to transform people in extremely negative ways. But a lot of times, people's military experience puts them in a positive direction and causes them to reject the violence that they were a part of, which is what we've been seeing the past year through the Gaza genocide, where large numbers of service members have been quitting the military, both publicly and privately, have been taking part in demonstrations to try to protest the U.S. role in it, and taking other really dramatic and heroic actions in that regard. And those are the kinds of people that Donald Trump and Hegseth and others who are going to be a part of the administration identify as extremists, when the real threat of right-wing extremism is going to go, of course, completely ignored, because that's really the base of the incoming administration.
Finally, Mike Preisner, a recent Guardian report headlined "Trump Pick a Threat to U.S. Military's Counter-Extremism Effort." Experts warned, quote, Pete Hegseth, Donald Trump's embattled choice for Secretary of Defense, will struggle to handle the serious problem of extremism in the U.S. military due to his own far-right political views. Experts in the subject have warned. The piece quotes Christopher Goldsmith, an Iraq War veteran, CEO of the nonprofit watchdog Task Force Butler, saying, quote, I think it's going to be an absolute disaster. Pete Hegseth is a domestic extremist, he said. The Guardian goes on to note, quote, Hegseth, an Iraq and Afghan war veteran, was barred from attending Joe Biden's 2021 inauguration after a fellow National Guardsman accused him of being an insider threat and an extremist with problematic tattoos. Mike Preisner, your final comments.
Yeah, well, we are in a tumultuous time in America, both a time of heightened political violence and at a time of growing despair and growing inequality in this country. The military, being a cross-section of that U.S. society, experiences those things as well. And in that moment, there are going to be numbers of people in the military and veterans who are going to gravitate towards right-wing organizations and go the path that Hegseth went. There's going to be people who do the opposite, and there's going to be people that just turn inward into self-destruction and despair. And so that's why I think it's very important for progressive-minded people, to realize that there is a role we can play in reaching out to people who are in the military, who can go down a different path and could go down the path of the many heroic service members who have taken a stand, who have quit the military, and who have used their experiences as a force for good in this world. And getting back to this main issue of that, we have these deep-rooted problems in our society that give rise to these incidents of mass violence. Service members and veterans, instead of being a #1 mass casualty offender, so many of them can actually be a part of changing society and getting to the root of those issues and moving society forward, as they have historically in the past. Vietnam veterans leading the struggle against the Vietnam War, Iraq veterans leading the struggle against the Iraq War, and in both those incidents being decisive factors in those wars coming to an end. We have much bigger problems to address in society. Service members and veterans can very much be a part of solving them, and it's very much needed that we foster that among progressive people, because there is clearly a faction on the right wing that is very much already doing that and taking advantage of that, and of course is entering the highest seats of power with people like Hegseth.
Democracy Now! Is funded by viewers like you. Please give today at democracynow.org/give.